people in the country do not recognize there was a Hispanic Chicano civil rights movement. They think the civil rights movement is all black.
The black movement was concerned with the question of civil rights. The Chicano movement was not only concerned with the question of civil rights, it was also concerned with the idea of cultural preservation.
Sometimes we'd be in a room with the Black Student Alliance talking about who was the most oppressed. And, you know, it was, oh yeah, well, my people came over in chains. Oh yeah, well, my people were here and they had the land taken away from them. Those movements worked together. And they all wanted the advancement of their people, and then collectively the advancement of people of color.
By the 1960s, Mexican Americans had transformed their brown power into a campaign for civil rights and cultural pride. The result? El Movimiento, the Chicano movement.
Across the Southwest, the Chicano movement was a mass movement of people. Not because we read books and not because we could theorize about poverty and oppression, but because we had lived it, and that together we had the power to change things if we could organize ourselves.
Well, we were Mexican and we were American, but when we went to school, we made a decision, a political decision, an ethical decision to call ourselves Chicanos.
It immediately identified everyone of the same political ilk. If you called yourself a Chicano, you knew you were dealing with somebody who wanted the same kinds of things as you. I was born in Lamar, Colorado, here in the United States of America. Mexican Americans, as with many small towns, there was a railroad track that ran down the middle of the town, and it divided the white population from the Mexican American population.
I realized that my mother was very sensitive to our food. When our neighbors came over, it was automatic for her to throw a dish towel over her freshly made tortillas. That was a very clear message to me that we were ashamed of what we ate.
There were signs that said no Mexicans allowed. I remember that as a little girl. But going to school, I remember they would line us up and search our heads for lice because we were farm worker children. And I had the lowest self-concept when I was growing up.
That day I had torn my pants before and my mom had patched it. My clothes were clean, but I went to school and I had a patch, and the teacher got upset and she told me to come up to the front of the classroom, and which I did, and then she said, look at this kid's clothes. This is what you call a dirty little Mexican. And she grabbed me by my hair, pulled my hair, and then told me to go sit back in the chair. And that's the first time I had any kind of awareness about being different.
Some Mexican Americans lived an unequal status in the land of plenty. Parents who experienced the prejudices of the 1940s and 50s found safety in assimilation. Their children spoke English, not Spanish.
Out of my 23 grandkids, not a single one of them talks Spanish. Culture is being siphoned through the language. And if you lose the language, you lose the culture. We're so busy surviving that we don't tend to these things that are precious to us.
In 1966, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez and others founded La Cruzada para la Justicia, the Crusade for Justice in Denver, Colorado.
Many people have called it the Brown House of the Chicano movement. Here we had the first Chicano art gallery and the first Chicano bookstore in this area. We had a teatro, a ballet group. We had a school here with over 360 students. It's been the meeting place for many people that came here to find answers and to find support.
The Crusade for Justice protested the Vietnam War, questioned the tactics of law enforcement, fought for the rights of farm workers, and sparked educational reform.
Revolution is a matter of change. When you change, you demand equality. When you change, your mind is free.
We try to encourage our people to circulate our money as opposed to spend it in other communities, start our own businesses, buy our own land, buy our own houses. Some of the goals related very much to the same goals that the black Muslims were advocating. Malcolm X and his philosophy was very instrumental with the crusade. We followed his doctrines more than we did Martin Luther King's.
I consider myself a Quirkyite, and that was a threat. Martin Luther King, he didn't frighten people. Cesar Chavez, he was the same as Martin Luther King. He didn't frighten people. He was talking about peace. Turn the other cheek, turn the other cheek, turn the other cheek. Corky said, no, if they hit you, you hit them back.
But the only way that we get the man off our back is when we decide as a people that nobody's going to put us down.
If you do something and nobody reacts and you're not being effective, if you do something and everybody gets concerned, then you have your finger on someone's nerve somewhere. The Crusade for Justice organization grew to have a tremendous impact as an advocate for people of Mexican descent, but also as an organizing model for urban areas in places like Dallas, Albuquerque, Los Angeles, Phoenix, because it had a tremendous power base.
Firmes estaremos, no nos moverán. Firmes estaremos, no nos moverán. Nuestro ideal es faro de victoria. No nos moverán.
Some Chicanos rejected the Crusade's reputation for intimidation, preferring the nonviolent principles of Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez.
We were in a hurry to create social change. Chavez would warn us, stop, you've been abused for 400 years. You're not going to change that in 2 years. And so he taught us that, and he taught us, you want to change the way things are, you got to do it two ways, only, no other way. Peacefully and within the law.
In 1966, Cesar Chavez, his wife Helen, and Dolores Huerta established the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee. They led a nationwide grape boycott to persuade growers to unionize its workforce. In Colorado, the effort was led by Juanita and Alfredo Herrera.
And we chose the Colorado. And it was very, very funny because in Colorado, I used to be here as a migrant. They said that the only thing that we can do, get out and do the boycott city by city. We go from Pueblo, Colorado Springs, and I go to Fort Collins and talk. Don't eat grapes. That's all what we ask you. At least boycott it. They didn't even know what boycott means. Okay? I said, don't eat grapes, period.
We picketed Saturday morning and Sunday. As people would come into the store, we'd give them a leaflet explaining the kind of union they were trying to form in California. And that if they ate the grapes that were sold by that store, they were non-union grapes. They were picked by scab workers to ask them not to buy those grapes.
I remember one of the very first experiences I had in college was working the boycott lines outside of Safeway. And that was the first time that I had experienced anyone calling me a terrible name, it was a terrible name, and telling me to go back where I came from. And I naively thought they meant Lamar, Colorado, that I should go back to Lamar. I was quite a self-righteous little thing when I was going to college, and I remember I'd go back and we'd have these long polemics and, discussions with my father, who loved Coors beer. Now, one of the big things we were boycotting all the time was Coors. And so we boycotted grapes, we boycotted Coors, we boycotted Taco Bell, You looked at us cross-eyed and we'd boycott you probably.
From northeastern Colorado to the western slope, from the Arkansas Valley to the San Luis Valley, the grape boycott worked. It proved that Chicanos could bring about change through action.
But you know, I kind of felt like we were doing something good, something noble, something for humanity. We thought that if we could organize farm workers, it was going to help their life. So it's kind of like a noble cause, you know, it's almost like a religion. Si se puede. You know, it can be done. It's possible.
The Colorado Migrant Council provided basic services for farm workers, such as adult education, job training, and Head Start programs. Lalo Delgado was a leader in the council for many years.
When I came and I saw how desperate was what the farm worker was going through, it just kind of blew my mind. I said, these people need all kinds of help.
No restrooms for women or men, no restrooms. So you have to wait all day or find a way that you can go to the bathroom. So it was very hard, especially for women.
My goodness, you know, as I shared with the legislative committee, you know, pregnant women lived in the farms. You know, they had no place to go. Not only use the toilet, but also wash their hands before they came back out to work in the fields where there was food.
I got legislation in Colorado to listen to me finally, because I would go every year and says, we need toilets in the fields. I'll pay for them. I got money. I beg you for 3 years to put toilets in the fields. So I'm just now going to instruct all the farm workers to pee on your tomatoes and your lettuce and everything, and you enjoy that.
I could not get it out of committee. And that was one of 2 times in my 12 years as a state legislator that after the committee hearing was over with and the other legislators had left that I broke down and cried.
The peaceful protests of the United Farm Workers inspired many to reform their own working conditions. In Brighton, Colorado, Guadalupe Briceño, often called the mother of the Colorado Chicano movement, spearheaded the 1968 Kitayama flower strike. After walking the picket line for 7 months, the women decided to end the strike with one final act of civil disobedience. They chained themselves to the company fence. In the early morning fog of February 15th, Weld County Sheriff deputies advanced toward the strikers. Instead of negotiating, the deputies sprayed tear gas over each woman. Working conditions at Brighton's Kitayama, Carnation, and Rose plant improved, but no union was established. After the United Farm Workers won the union contract and ended the grape boycott, it turned its support to the lettuce and vegetable workers, who made 20 cents less than the minimum wage. In Center, Colorado, Orlinda de Vargas led her lettuce crew on strike and established the group Dicho y Hecho, said and done. Farm workers from the San Luis Valley, Arkansas Valley, and northeastern Colorado joined Dicho y Hecho. They walked for 7 days, over 112 miles, from Pueblo to the Colorado state capital in Denver. The Center lettuce strike led to walkouts in Arizona and California and set the stage for the nationwide lettuce boycott. In support of their compadres, many grew their own lettuce. Boycotts and strikes were effective strategies to challenge the status quo for adults and teenagers. In March of 1969, students at Denver's West High School walked out of their classrooms and into the streets. The West High blowout symbolized more than youthful rebellion. Both students and parents insisted on an end to discrimination in education. They called for Chicano studies classes. They demanded the resignation of the teacher who allegedly said, all Mexicans are stupid because their parents are stupid. And if you eat Mexican food, you'll look like a Mexican.
And so the kids protested that. They went to the principal, asked the principal to do something. The principal didn't do anything. So they had a meeting with the parents and the principal, and still nothing was done. So finally the students went to the crusade.
The days that followed, I mean, there were some like riots around there where police were coming around the neighborhood a lot, and they were people throwing rocks and bricks and you name it at them. And the police seemed to all know who each one of us were, the active members of the crusade. We were just approached violently by the police, just grabbing us and throwing us down to the ground and handcuffing us. We were handcuffed inside the paddy wagon. They sprayed the inside of the paddy wagon with mace. A lot of young people wanted to avenge that situation, and so there was a lot of riot activity that was going on.
Within 24 hours, the walkout at West High School led to solidarity walkouts at North, Lincoln, Manual, East, Adams City High School, and nearly 10 or 11 junior high schools throughout the inner city. And within 48 hours, the public school system was paralyzed by this walkout.
Corky, as far as you are able to tell, do we have what you would call a situation that will remain peaceful in Denver?
Peace comes by mutual respect, and we hope that those forces in this city, which means the police forces, start to respect our community, our young people.
That walkout led to the radicalization and the politicalization of an entire generation of young people of Mexican descent. It also stood as a model for student activism from which college students learned from.
Within weeks of the West High blowout, the Crusade for Justice sponsored the historic 1969 National Chicano Youth Liberation Conference. The pilgrimage was a fiesta of Chicanismo, with workshops and declarations. The manifesto, El Plan Espiritual de Aztlán, the spiritual plan of Aztlán, was introduced. The plan called for social, economic, cultural, and political independence.
They expected about 300 people. 1,500 showed up.
We're telling the students the university is to make the complete circuit from the barrio or from his home to the school, and make the complete circuit back to the community to be to contribute, not to exploit.
During the youth conference, the Crusade held a rally at the state capitol in Denver. As attendees gathered around Corky Gonzalez, someone yanked down the Colorado state flag and in its place hoisted up the Mexican flag.
We weren't trying to overthrow government. We were trying to improve government. And there were some Chicanos who believed that the best thing to do would be to drive Anglos out of this area and create our own nation to ourselves. For some individuals, that was a political reality. But for most of us, we knew that it was a metaphysical idea. It was a way to organize. It was a way to unite ourselves under a cultural basis. And what we were seeking was civil rights and the right to teach our children our own history.
That's why we went all over the streets shouting, Chicano power, because we wanted to enchant ourselves with the phrase. We wanted to believe we had power.
Corky Gonzalez's epic poem, Yo Soy Joaquín, I Am Joaquín, was widely distributed at the youth conference. It is praised as the anthem of El Movimiento.
I wrote I Am Joaquin because I wanted to say something historical about ourselves and something about our present and something about our future. I want to inspire young people to understand themselves, and art in itself may be the very thing that carries us on.
The reason we began to write was, number one, to use our art as a platform, as a forum, to say what's wrong with us. Where are we aching? Where are we hurting? Secondly, we wrote to preserve our culture. The third purpose was to inspire the people in the movement and for us to be inspired by the people in the movement.
Probably the most important symbol that I brought about into the movement was the mestizo head. When I was in Mexico, we came across this image on a mural. It had a tri-faced head, Spanish on one side and an Indian on the other, and the offspring was the mestizo. So essentially what I did is I just took that image, I put a mustache on it and made it older. And this symbol I started mass producing. So it became a symbol to the Chicano movement, you know, identification of who we are.
The Chicano art movement adopted ancestral icons and political symbols which gave meaning to their plight and hope for their future. Murals, art galleries, teatro, newspapers, books, and radio stations were devoted to Chicano life and culture.
Soy soldado de levita, de esos de caballería, de esos de caballería, soy soldado de levita. El que nace desgraciado de...
The movement gave Chicanos the confidence to publicly recognize and celebrate their holidays, Cinco de Mayo in May and Mexican Independence Day in September.
Nearly 5,000 men, women, and children marched today in Dia 16 parade. The people are proud to be Coloradans, they're proud to be Americans, but they're also proud to be Chicanos. Andy Martinez, Channel 4 Eyewitness News.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
The civil rights movement of the late 1960s was a harbinger of change for the United States. Newly empowered Americans voiced their opinions about important social conditions. In New Mexico, Reyes López Tijerina organized La Alianza Federal de Mercedes, the Federal Land Grant Alliance. Aliancistas fought for the return of lands seized after the Mexican-American War. In 1967, they occupied a disputed land grant in Kit Carson National Forest and raided the Tierra Amarilla courthouse. Their beliefs inspired many Chicanos in Colorado and the Southwest. Their slogan, Tierra o Muerte, land or death. Citizens took to the streets in the name of women's liberation, Native American rights, and in protest to the war in Vietnam. Within a span of 2 months, Dr. Martin Luther King and Senator Robert Kennedy were assassinated. Their deaths cast a shadow over the country.
It was a very negative period, a very depressing period. And so I guess the whole country had a choice, either tear itself apart or try to build for the future. Right after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, one of the first responses by the federal government, especially in education, was to begin what were called educational opportunity programs to recruit African American students and other ethnic minority students to the colleges and universities.
We were so committed to the idea of getting other Chicanos into school that we spent all of our working and waking moments, it seemed, involved in this movement to try to get people there.
They had El Centro Emiliano Zapata. Those were Chicanos that had gotten their degrees, went back to the San Luis Valley in Alamosa and Adams State and started recruiting all around the valley. So people like myself from San Luis, students from Antonito, El Centro, Montevista, Del Norte, Sierra Grande, all of us were able to go on a pre-collegiate program at Adams State that summer, and boy, did they indoctrinate us. That was the turning point in my life.
Boulder was a beehive of activity. The Chicano population at the campus of the University of Colorado from 1968 to 1971 went from about fewer than 50 Hispanic students to more than 1,000.
And there were 1,000 other people who looked like me, who had last names like me. but they didn't go by Acosta. They went by Acosta, Aguilar, Mondragon, Garcia, Gutierrez. They had all those names, and people knew how to pronounce them. That I was no longer just being called Mexican. I became Chicana, and I loved it.
The Chicano movement was born out of that nationalistic ideal that says, okay, we're Mexican and we're American. One of the quips we used to use is that we were neither Mexican nor American, but the hyphen in the middle. And that's what the Chicano was in those days. We were the hyphen in the middle because we were not accepted by either Mexicans nor the United States. So we had to forge something on our own.
The defining moment in terms of the Chicano movement for myself was when I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder. And so it was through that university experience and learning about Chicano history, Chicano studies, that I began to be able to understand the social conditions that I had come from.
So it all came together for us during the Civil Rights Movement, and there was no turning back. It's like they say, the most dangerous Chicano in this country is the one that has an education, the one that understands who they are, where they came from, and where they're going.
Across Colorado, Chicanos politicized themselves and formed campus groups at colleges and universities. Students routinely traveled to each other's school to support La Raza. MECHA, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, at the Southern Colorado State College in Pueblo, not only fought for bilingual and bicultural education, but shut down the school to get it.
They says, well, if we give you Chicano studies, will you call off this protest? And we said, sure. And then they said, well, do you have your faculty, your students, and your scholarship money together? I says, yes, we do. Then they said, I guess we can start in September with our new classes. And we started Chicano Studies 101 with over 100 students in that class. We had taken on academia, and we had brought it all together to where we had 100 students in there that were to become future leaders in our community. I hated to go through that process to do it, but they wouldn't listen to us until we did the demonstration.
The largest Chicano campus group in Colorado was UMAS, United Mexican American Students. They championed bilingual education and led grape and lettuce boycotts. Like other student movements across the country, Chicano groups protested the Vietnam War and denounced it as racially unjust.
It was a poor man's war. We were represented in the combat units disproportionately. There were Puerto Ricans, poor blacks, poor whites, poor Chicanos that were in the front lines fighting because of our macho hang-ups we have. And when we go into the military, we go into the Special Forces, we go into the Marine Corps, we go into the SEALs, we go into the hardest of the hard because we have to show and prove ourselves. When we got there, they looked at us as Chicanos being part Indian. They said, look, you're taking point. And in all my units, all the rifle units, it was mostly minorities and poor whites that were in those rifle units. The further back you got, if you got to a mortar section, there'd be a few minorities in there. If you got to the artillery section, there'd be hardly any minorities. You know, these are my feelings about the war. They were wasting our people. And that was one of the reasons when I came back, I took a stand against the war and joined the anti-war movement.
I volunteered all the way. I volunteered for Vietnam. I was as gun-ho as you could get, but I kind of hit a wall. I really felt that it was wrong. We had no business there, and I was still there. And I had that difficult choice of what am I going to do now that I'm still here. You know, if I was back in the States, it'd be easy to be against the war. Being against the war in Vietnam was kind of a tough thing. The anti-war demonstrations were happening on almost every campus in the country, and Mesa College was no exception. That was really kind of my first introduction to activism, was as an anti-war veteran.
I asked my parents to sign for me. I was 17 years old. I was still in high school. So I joined 6 months before I graduated, joined the Air Force. It was not at all like I thought it was going to be. And that was really probably my first time of dealing with racism. And that was right when I was getting ready to be discharged in '69. There's no way to really translate it, but I had a lot of coraje. And I made a lot of enemies, especially with a lot of the bikers and a lot of the vets, because I came home from the war, and then when I got involved in the movement, I started speaking out against the war. I came home from a war to a war, and I've been fighting ever since. And sometimes when I sit and think about it, it's easy to become addicted to confrontation. And that's what happened until I met Corky. I walked up and shook hands with him, and I told him my name, and I just told him, who do you want me to kill? He goes, why you have so much hatred, brother? I told him, because I hate what the white man has done to me. He says, you know who you hate? He says, you hate you, brother. You hate what they've taught you about you, and you hate what you've done, and you hate what you've become. I was dumbfounded. I didn't know. I had no response. He let go of my hand. He told me, you know what? I have a place in Denver, it's called the Crusade for Justice, where we struggle to deal with the racism and the hatred and the things you're talking about. After that, I went and sat down, and then Corky spoke.
And then we asked them, what do you know about the 20,000 years of Indian civilization that is part of our heritage? What do you know about the tortilla? And they didn't know anything about it except to eat it. And let me tell you that the tortilla was being made 700 years before a Spaniard hit here.
When he got up and spoke, there was 2,000 young people there. But he was talking to me. Corky Gonzalez showed me a light. He gave me an avenue, and he showed me how to make change.
The Chicano movement of the early 1970s was bolstered by anti-war sentiment.
The thing that really solidified the place or people's ideas on what the Chicano movement was LA moratorium, 1970. First largest demonstration against the Vietnam War by Chicanos. A lot of people weren't comfortable doing the Black Panther, carrying the rifles in the street type of thing, but they didn't have a problem going out there and screaming and hollering.
Nearly 30,000 Chicanos marched in protest, then gathered together for music and speeches. As Los Angeles police tried to clear the area, the peace rally turned into a riot. Tear gas and beatings left hundreds injured. Dozens were arrested. 3 were killed, including noted LA Times journalist Ruben Salazar.
It was sort of a turning point. They came in and disrupted a peaceful protest, and I think a lot of people then started thinking, something else is going on here.
The aftermath of the LA moratorium motivated more Chicanos to join with their fellow Americans in the anti-war movement. Others swelled the ranks of the Crusade for Justice and the United Farm Workers. Early civil rights organizations, LULAC in the late 1920s and the American GI Forum in the late 1940s, set the stage for new organizations such as La Raza and the Brown Berets.
It was like, we don't need the police in our neighborhood, we'll do it ourselves.
The Brown Berets began as a militant security detail. It transformed itself into a force for social change.
We started taking responsibility, not just blaming, not just demonstrating, but providing a service to our community, dealing with racism, dealing with fair housing. We started supporting the farm workers on their boycotts and the demonstrations against Safeways, against Coors. And at that time, I think we were boycotting so many different things, you couldn't buy almost anything. These were all positive actions that were taking place.
Colorado Chicanas and Chicanos were united in their quest for self-determination in education, employment, and politics. In 1970, the Crusade for Justice sponsored its second National Chicano Youth Liberation Conference. 3,000 people attended from 15 states, double from the previous year. Attendees passed a resolution in favor of a third political party for Chicanos, La Raza Unida, the United People.
We're not developing politicos, we're developing a party, we're developing a platform. We'll be educating our people to the fallacy of a two-party system, which is one monster with two heads that eats from the same trough.
As Malcolm X said in one of his speeches, to determine who's going to end up in the White House and who's going to end up in the doghouse, you know. And that's the position that we want to be placed in.
Chicano activists ran for local and state office. Al Gurule ran for governor.
Here in Colorado, we wanted to get 10% of the vote to become an established party. And we never made that goal. We just got like 3% of the vote.
La Raza Unida's national convention was held in El Paso, Texas, 1972. Many Coloradans traveled to the convention, including UMA's activist and leader Ricardo Falcón. While driving through New Mexico, Falcón's car overheated. The car pulled into a gas station run by white supremacist Perry Brunson.
They jump out of the car, they're trying to cool the radiator. Perry Brunson walks out of the gas station and he says, we don't waste water here. And so Ricardo approaches him and says, it's not a problem, we'll pay for the water. You know, we have this issue with the radiator. And so then he turns around and he says, you Chicano motherfuckers are all alike. And he walks into his gas station, and then Freddie and Ricardo talk a little bit about, this is going to be a bad situation, what shall we do? Ricardo says, I'll go in and I'll pay. So as Ricardo's approaching the doorway to the gas station there, Brunson reaches under the counter, he pulls out a .38 and he fires into Ricardo point blank and he shoots him. And then a state patrol comes to my house and says, well, your husband has died, has passed away, and so you should probably, I don't even remember what he said to me. All I know is that Ricardo had died. I think that was a defining moment for me in terms of what it means to be a soldier in the movement.
I also had a report that Colorado is wearing the black armbands in mourning for Ricardo Falcón.
I'm Francisco Martinez, and I'm an attorney on one of the teams that have been investigating this matter.
I know in my heart and in my soul that my husband was murdered. The town of Oro Grande and Alamogordo helped Mr. Brunson in every way they could with the murder because no attempt of any sort of help was given to my husband. He was murdered in Alamogordo over water. And how do I explain this to my son?
I remember saying when Falcón died, that man made the mistake that he thought he killed just another Mexican. He didn't realize that he killed a Mexican who has power behind him and people behind him. This won't go away. We won't forget. Here we were on our way to a conference, and we ended up organizing around a murder.
Señoras, estimados carnales delegados, permítanme y que viva la raza y que viva la
La Raza Unida was considered an impossible dream. And this is a historic day for everyone that's here.
So the question was always, is it really a political party where we're trying to get people elected, or is it just a platform to speak about the Chicano issues?
We thought, well, you know what? Everything is up for grabs. Everything. The Democrats have not done anything for Mexican people. The Republicans have not done anything. And you know what? We know our issues. We can create a political party. There was not one thing that we could not do within the context of community and the Chicano movement.
Colorado came here to take part in unity.
Vying for National Party chairman was Gorky Gonzalez from Colorado, Reyes Lopez Tijerina from New Mexico, and Jose Angel Gutierrez from Texas. Gutierrez was an effective organizer who generated political victories, especially in Crystal City, Texas.
In behalf of the Colorado delegation, in the memory of Ricardo Falcon, Colorado casts 39 votes for Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez.
Mr. Chairman, I cannot listen to you unless the delegation is sitting down.
After a contentious vote, the leadership of party chairman was awarded to Jose Angel Gutierrez.
The three leaders got up, locked hands, and said, we're together, united, and that was about the last time you ever saw those three men together again.
It lasted for 8 years, 9 years, where it was really kind of active, and then it just kind of came apart. We weren't really as successful as we wanted to be, but we let them know that you know, we were a force to be dealt with.
On a winter day in 1973, the American Indian movement reclaimed part of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, known as Wounded Knee. The Crusade for Justice was suspected of supplying weapons to activists at Wounded Knee. Tensions escalated between law enforcement and Crusade members. In March of that year, a confrontation between Luis Junior Martinez and a Denver police officer resulted in death. Known as the St. Patrick's Day Massacre, the police officer was shot 3 times, once in the face. Martinez was shot twice and died. An hour later, an explosion ripped through the apartment building where Martinez had been staying, adjacent to the Crusade headquarters. Denver police blamed the explosion on the Crusade for Justice. The Crusade blamed the police as payback for their support for Wounded Knee. The next day, the building was demolished, proving neither claim. The 1970s El Movimiento continued with confrontations, showdowns, and sometimes more tragedy. In the spring of 1974, at the University of Colorado at Boulder, activists took over temporary building number 1, TB1, headquarters of UMass's Educational Opportunity Program.
After a series of meetings, we came to the conclusion that our worst enemy on the campus had been the administration of the program that was supposed to be helping us. The real issue was financial aid. We felt that the activists opened the doors, deserved to be there like everybody else. So we went in there about 7 o'clock in the morning. There's 8 of us. We threw all the desks we could find down the stairwell and barricaded ourselves on the 3rd floor.
Food was sent by the Crusade for Justice. Other people brought food. It was like a potluck. We slept on floors. We lived in the building.
I think one of the things that we don't do in the movement is we don't laugh enough. And something that made me laugh was about the 4th day of this occupation, we're going, man, you stink, you know. We hadn't even brought a toothbrush, a change of clothes, underwear, anything. So anyway, we're like, I'm going to take a sponge bath. And said, yeah, but you can put on the same old clothes, and then, you know, you can wash those clothes, but what are you going to wear while you're washing them? And we had this big dilemma, and somebody opened up this big locker and says, well, look at this. And we had a dance group. We had all these great chado outfits and big dresses like the girls wear that look like butterflies. And so so for the day that we were doing our little laundry, we're all dressed like chados, man. We look cool. We all look like Zapata and Pancho Villa. And we got these great dance costumes with conchos and stuff. It was great. I mean, it's one of my favorite memories of the occupation of TB1.
Police SWAT teams circled TB1. University officials refused to negotiate. Weeks into the standoff, with no end in sight, several students took matters into their own hands. They armed themselves with explosives. On May 27, 1974, Dynamite detonated inside a parked car at Chautauqua Park. Killed were Neva Arlene Romero, Una Jacola, and Reyes Paul Martinez. Within 48 hours, another parked car exploded. 3 more people perished: Heriberto Terán, Francisco Doherty, and Florencio Freddy Granado. Antonio Alcantar survived but was seriously injured. The dead are known as Los Seis de Boulder, the 6 of Boulder.
It was frightening. These were close, personal friends, and they were gone.
The official conclusion? Los Seis de Boulder mishandled the dynamite. The unofficial conclusion? Murder.
I don't doubt that they intended to possess explosives. What I doubt is that they detonated them and accidentally killed themselves. I believe they were set up. That's personal theory. You know, Freddy Granado and I were going to come to Pueblo and start a newspaper as soon as I graduated, and I graduated that spring, and then he got killed. And for the last 30 years, I think about those people just about every day, and I consciously say, I'm going to do something that they didn't get a chance to do.
They gave their lives for the movement, but wherever they are today, they need to know that there are people like myself and all my 4 daughters and hundreds and thousands of young people that took up where they left off.
Murieron los 6 de Boulder, 2 noches en mayo en 74.
3 decades later, annual memorials still celebrate the soldiers of the Colorado Chicano movement. Included, Los Seis de Boulder, Luis Jr. Martinez, and Ricardo Falcón.
Although I think some historians think or have a perception that rebellion started in the 60s in urban areas like Denver and Pueblo, Albuquerque and LA, within the context of Colorado, areas like the San Luis Valley were fertile ground for rebellion.
In the San Luis Valley of southern Colorado lies La Sierra, the mountain. The ownership of La Sierra has been disputed since 1960.
We settled that community in the mid-1800s, and we lived off the land. There's no way that my ancestors, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my parents could have survived without the resources on that mountain.
There's no way that you can live in the lowlands in this elevation with 8 to 10 inches annually of rainfall without accessing the uplands. The uplands where all the wildlife were, where the fish were, where everything that you needed. It was a cornucopia.
Heirs of original settlers of San Luis claimed La Sierra for themselves and based their legal right on the 1863 Beauvien document.
That 1863 Beauvien document basically stated that the original settlers of San Luis, of the Culebra, would have the rights to that mountain and that those rights were to be held in perpetuity.
In 1960, property owner Jack Taylor fenced off La Sierra from the townspeople.
That's when all hell broke loose. They were going to hang Jack Taylor. They shot into the jail. I mean, it was a riot. So, you know, that was before there was a Chicano movement. And I saw that as a teenager. It stayed in my mind. It's in my mind. It's embedded in my mind.
And one of the things that I want to make real clear is that our rights come before the rights of the owner, because the mountain is subservient to the land. My husband and I started the Land Rights Council in 1977. Our ultimate goal was to regain access to the mountain and the historic use rights. Those rights included hunting, fishing, picnicking, grazing, wood gathering. We went into court honestly hoping that we would get some kind of justice within a reasonable amount of time. For me in 1981, a reasonable amount of time would have been 10 years. Never envisioning that it would take 3 decades. June 24th, 2002, the Colorado Supreme Court, in a decision of 4-3, came out and said that we most definitely had the right to go up on that mountain to graze, to gather wood. Now, we didn't get the right to go back and hunt. We didn't get the right to go back and recreate and fish and that stuff. The legal battle has ended. The battle to restore that mountain, the battle to maintain that mountain for future generations is just beginning.
Mexican-American women, such as Dolores Huerta, heroine of the United Farm Workers' struggle, were at the forefront of El Movimiento. Other Chicanas remained in traditional supporting roles.
You cannot become politically aware and not realize that your own rights have been limited because you're female. We've taken on more leadership roles. We might still be in the kitchen, but we go from cutting up menudo to the press conference without batting an eye.
Many times when we talk about our Chicano leaders, we have a macho tendency to talk about men. But for every man, there's usually 2 or 3 women who were doing equally as well, if not better, than the men. But the limelight goes to the males. Corky Gonzalez, Jose Angel Gutierrez, Reyes Lopez Tijerina, and Chavez.
In revolution, there are no superiors. They're all compañeros y compañeras, that one must depend on the other, and that any movement can only survive if their women are involved.
I think it's very important as we tell the history of the Chicano movement that it wasn't just about the leaders or the people that were up front giving the speeches, but it was about everybody who passed out flyers, attended a meeting, or just talked to somebody else in their home about what was going on, educating people. That's what the movement was about.
You have the folks that believe that you work within the system to cause change, and then you have the folks that were led by Corky, that saying, no, you have to push the system. You have to work outside of the system. You have to cause the system to change. You have to beat the system, you know. And so Corky took the more militant route.
The Chicano movement itself was empowering. It was for the first time you could make the rules. You could look out your window and see everything that was wrong and say, you know what, I can change that. I can go out and change that. We showed that you can work together, that whites and blacks and browns and Native Americans can come together and make social changes.
You know, one time my mom calls me up, she says, Juan, you won. I go, what do you mean, Mom? She says, oh, I just came from the grocery store and they have Cinco de Mayo signs all over the store. It says, happy celebrate Cinco de Mayo. He says, you guys won. And I just thought it was funny because she thought we were fighting for supermarkets to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. And, you know, obviously that wasn't what we were fighting for, but in a way, she's right. It was the Mexican culture, Mexican holidays are much more accepted and respected and celebrated now than they were 30 years ago.
The whole Chicano movement was a renaissance. Be proud that you're brown, be proud that you're a Chicano. Our success is going to be the future. Our kids are the ones that are going to make the difference. Who knows, maybe someday we'll have a Mexicano president, a Spanish-speaking president.
He or she could be walking the streets right now, any place, saying, hey, when I grow up, I want to be president. And I see it happening. I really do.
Yo soy chicano, tengo